Welcome to the Gaming of Performance Podcast, episode 18. On this episode of the podcast, I talk with Coach Jeremy Sheppard. Coach Sheppard currently trains professional surfers and professional snowboarders. He has had experiences at the Queensland Academy of Sport, Hurley Australia, and currently he is working in Whistler with professional snowboarders. Coach Sheppard brings a fresh perspective that you may not have heard before, and has some really great ideas and methods in how he trains his athletes. Jeremy is not only a great person, but a great coach as well. So without further ado, here is Coach Jeremy Sheppard. Coach Sheppard, thank you so much for your time. I'm really looking forward to talking to you. We met years ago. You probably don't remember at a PRI conference, or a DNS, conference in Portland. And so really excited to get to hear some of your thoughts. For the listeners at home, will you tell us a little bit about your background, your motivation, and how you got to where you are?
Sure. Thanks for having me on. It's really cool how our world works. How I, kind of at the last minute realized that DNS level 2, I think it was, in Portland fit into my calendar on my way home to Australia from Vancouver Island, and now we're talking from different parts of the continent. It's pretty cool.
No, exactly.
So I've been a strength conditioning coach. I first identified with that term in probably the late 90s. Earlier in the 90s, I was working in that capacity, but didn't quite know what it was really called. As the internet developed and became commonplace for you to gather information over the internet and stuff like that, it created more of a sense of the profession and allowed us to communicate better as a profession and memberships and governing bodies and things like that. But I've been kind of making a lot of mistakes as a coach since the 90s and have had the good fortune of learning from a couple of those mistakes and growing as a coach. A lot of good fortune in working with a big variety of athletes, which has really, really been super helpful for me not to get pigeonholed early in my career and be challenged by different aspects and different challenges that different sport contexts bring. For the last while, I probably would say that I've been pretty focused on volleyball. I've done a lot of work in volleyball, and then surfing for 7 years at Surfing Australia. My experience in Australia was amazing at Australian Institute of Sport and with the Australian Volleyball Federation and Queensland Academy of Sport. I just could not replace those learning opportunities and also the families, family of colleagues that I have there. That was incredible. And I'm now at the Canadian Sport Institute. So I'm a director of performance solutions at Canadian Sport Institute. I focus mostly on the winter side. I live in Whistler, British Columbia, which is a mountain resort. And it's basically a village, but it's a very famous resort with a lot of rideable terrain and a very famous terrain park, which is why we're based here. And I primarily work with slopestyle, but I have two roles with snowboard. I'm the off-snow coach for slopestyle and big air. And then I'm what's called the integrated service team lead. So that's kind of like your high-performance lead for the practitioners. So organizing, therapy, doctors, all that kind of stuff, nutrition, all the different tertiary and integrated services that we work with teams on.
Oh, that's really cool. Will you elaborate a little bit on some of the important things that you gained at, say, the Queensland Academy of Sport or Hurley Australia or even the Canadian Sports Institute?
Sure. A lot of different contexts. I mean, what comes to mind for me in the time at the Australian Institute of Sport was the amount of growth that I experienced in applying a little bit more scientific method to decision making, because I was surrounded by some of the world's best applied sports scientists. That experience you just can't replace it. And I literally mean that because the Australian Institute of Sport is no longer what it used to be, and those people are no longer even employed there in that same capacity. So I feel so lucky, and not a day goes by where the skill sets that I learned there are not advantageous. So that's something that I'm very, very grateful for. I completed my PhD actually while I was working at the Australian Institute of Sport, and And that experience was also a huge upgrade, for me as a coach, to be able to answer a lot of my own questions a bit more.
Yeah.
Queensland Academy of Sport, I know this sounds a bit professional and less professional, but man, I was friends with our entire S&C team.
Uh-huh.
One of the guys is my son's godson,
wow.
my godfather,
Yeah.
Just what as we'd say in Australia, a purple patch. Like, working there was just such a fun time period. Like, we were serious and we were focused on high performance, and like Anthony Georgie was there and he was working with like the best female sprint swimmers in the world, right? And then you'd walk in and there'd be, Olympic gold medalist or Olympic silver medalist long jumper working with Anthony, and then he'd worked with a couple of the girls who were working on breaking their own world records in the pool, and Kieran Young, who's my son Jake, he's his godfather. He was always doing amazing work, and he did his masters with me while we were there. Just super fun times, and obviously I was working with sprint cycling, beach volleyball, and volleyball, so I was in my element.
Yeah.
Because I love working with those sports as well.
That's amazing. Dang, okay. Will you kind of elaborate a little bit on, so you talked earlier about how you did a good job of not getting pigeonholed in your career, right? So will you talk about that a little bit and how you work to diversify your skill set and the teams that you were able to work with?
For sure. And, part of that was not so much a strategy or insight or even advice that was given to me. I mean, Ishvan Baliu was one of my early mentors. For about 2 years, I would say that from 1998 to 2000, Ishvan was the most important mentor I had in terms of contact. And he obviously advocated and suggested for that. But to be honest, in the first 10 years of my career, it was necessity, because you're just trying to build up a critical mass of experience that allows you to kind of make a career out of it. I would say, the first 10 years of my career was primarily volunteerism.
Okay. Wow.
And so you're just like, okay, I'm going to volunteer at the athletics club. And so I was an assistant sprints coach because I wanted to learn more about how to work with fast people. Well, okay, well, I'm a nobody with a university degree and some experience as an athlete myself. But that just kind of makes you welcome at the track. Yeah. You got to build up that critical mass. It wasn't like, in the mid 90s, it's not like you could, first of all, I didn't have a computer and barely knew, the internet was in its infancy, right? I was like, oh, okay, I got Hotmail. What the hell is that, right? So it's not like you could just Google, I'm going to take this sick internship. And, that kind of stuff, maybe it existed, but more word of mouth or through NCAA Division I universities that had systems and structures in place. I was rolling up and being like, do you guys want to be physically superior to your opposition? Because that might help, and I could maybe help. Hockey teams and basketball teams. And I remember my first paid gig, it was 5 years in, and I was like, I'm getting $1,000 a year. I was like, a year?
That's
that
wild.
Was sick. I was like, oh my God, I've made it. Right?
Thought you was rich,
So the diversity came through necessity.
Okay.
And then I ended up linking up with. I was actually applying for a different job. I needed something to pay the bills, and I ended up. My resume was put in front of someone who was also the volleyball coach for the university. Okay. And so then I started working with them, and then I started working with beach volleyball, and then I started working with World Tour volleyball players, and then I started working with indoor and Olympians, and then I started working with, that attracted some attention, triathletes and athletics athletes and sprint cyclists and things like that. And so it just grows from there. But, early career, you're always just, you're just happy.
Trying to make it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I'm with that. That's awesome. So one of these things, how do you approach sports science, right? Because you have a large background in sports science, right? And how do you utilize the information that you gather?
Super interesting question, because I think you could probably ask it of 20 people who have similar views, but they might answer it with a different lens.
Yeah, exactly.
For me, I guess the lens that I would go to answer that question in the most authentic way possible would be, I look at sports science and sports science research as someone who's almost a fraud.
Okay.
Really, like when we think about coaching, we often say the art and the science, right?
Yeah.
We don't say the science and the art.
Exactly. Okay.
We say the art and the science.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very much one of those guys that was like, I like sport. I want to coach because I'm not going to get drafted to the NHL. What does that look like? So I coached hockey for a bit, and I was like, shoot, man, I'm not going to grow as a person if I spend the rest of my life in hockey rinks.
Yeah.
And that wasn't a life I wanted, and I had some experience in the hockey world as well, where I was like, you become who you surround yourself by, right? So I was kind of like, there's some great people in the world of hockey, but I kind of wanted a different path.
Mm-hmm.
So then I sort of stumbled around, like, okay, what am I going to do? And it turns out I wanted to be a strength conditioning coach, just didn't know what to call it.
Mm-hmm.
So where sports science comes in, I was really behind.
Okay.
Like I wasn't like excelling in physics in high school or anything like that. I was surviving.
Okay.
And it's not like I was like, oh, I'm going to do an undergrad in physics with a double major in biochemistry, right?
Uh-huh.
I was struggling.
Yeah.
So I had to kind of catch up. So I approached it a little different. I look at it. I became a sports scientist to make myself a better coach.
Okay.
And so, in a sense, and I'll be really honest with you, it was almost an act of rebellion.
Okay.
And I look at it like rebellion can be very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it sounds cliche because I work with rebellious athletes. Right?
Yeah.
Surfers are generally rebellious compared to team sport athletes.
Yeah.
And snowboarders are way even more so.
Mm-hmm.
Way more so. Very much, they got to where they are by breaking rules and making up new ones, right?
Yeah.
They didn't get to where they are by doing what they're told and wearing a uniform to practice and all that kind of stuff that we value in other contexts.
Yeah.
So for me, rebellion in sports science is just saying, well, why?
Yeah.
And how do we do it better? And is that the only way? And what if I try something different? And, I know there's a scientific method and that has certain rules, but within it, you're essentially being a punk. Like you're saying,
okay,
I'm not going to take your word for it.
Yeah, that's a funny way to put it.
Quo.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never heard of being a punk quite in the science context, so that's very interesting.
I mean, but you got to take that with a grain of salt. Like, ask anyone I've collaborated with in sports science, they're not going to say, what's great about Jeremy is he's a good sports scientist.
Yeah.
No one's actually going to say that. They might say that I've accomplished a few things, but man, I'm punching way above my weight. I am that super, super, super ugly dude who somehow scored the great-looking girl on his arm.
Okay.
Like, I'm not a great sports scientist.
Yeah.
That's why if I've published something or written a book chapter, look at who wrote it with me.
Okay.
A really good sports scientist, right? Like, sometimes I got like 8 people on a paper, and 9 of them are really good sports scientists, and then there's me.
Okay, fair enough.
And so I look at it like punk. Like, what is being a punk and being a rebel?
Yeah.
Well, it's an intense curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And, someone who wants to challenge the established rules.
Yeah.
And if you challenge the established rules, you can sometimes awaken creativity and then create your own new rule, or at least your own new rule of thumb.
Yeah.
Because as a card-carrying punk and rebel, I actually hate rules, right?
Okay,
I don't mind heuristics or rules of thumb, but I don't really like rules, so I love to challenge them. And curiosity and humility, which is where we get reflection practices, which lead to humility, that creates a growth mindset. Mm-hmm. If you have a growth mindset and you're a coach, you're going to experiment. If you experiment formally, you might call it research.
Okay.
If you experiment informally, it's still a form of research.
Yeah.
So to me, a good coach is constantly researching.
Okay.
When we say research, though, we think a bit different, right?
Yeah.
So it's that lens, like I talked about, the lens that you view things.
That's super interesting. Okay. So how are people messing up in this area of sports science?
I think that's contextual, and I think it would be, as a not very good sports scientist, I don't know if I'm the right guy to answer that question. I definitely don't have any strong held views on it.
Yeah.
Simply put, not my call to make. And I'm not trying to be super humble.
Yeah.
I'm being really, for the sake of sounding humble, being really honest. I would have trouble saying that's being messed up. But
Uh-huh.
I would share with you a couple concerns.
Okay.
So I've moved to North America from Australia. I am from North America. I was born in Canada. I've lived in California and Canada.
Okay.
But I've spent a lot of time in Australia, and I did do my grad degrees there. I did my master's there, and I did my PhD there.
Okay.
And North America has a lot of strengths in its system over Australia, but one of the ones that Australia and New Zealand, and to an extent the United Kingdom, have, where they're going to kick our ass and continue to kick our ass in sports science, is the way the universities are structured. So, for example, you can have someone here enters a PhD and they want to do an applied PhD. That's challenging at a lot of universities.
Okay.
There's some universities that are just straight out. They're not going to get enough support for that student to do, say, a PhD in load monitoring of jumps in basketball players and its effect on jump adaptation and patellar tendinopathy. I don't know. I literally just made that up on the spot.
Sounded
so
good,
let's
though.
Let's say that's someone's passion, right?
Okay.
That's what they want to do, right?
Yeah.
So the challenge with that is, like, there'll be some universities where it's like the department, there's going to be some fuddy-duddies in there who don't understand the applied work and the applied nature, and going to be like, well, we need more mechanistic questions, we need more isolation of variables, we need larger sample sizes, etc. Which, if you adhere to all of those suggestions, the more mechanistic you get, it might, I'm not saying will, but it might reduce the direct relevance to the strength and conditioning community, right?
Yeah.
So that's, to me, that's a downer, right? You need to recruit more subjects. You're going to dilute the pool. So now you might start to include recreational or semi-competitive basketball players in your study, just to get someone who's maybe the stats police and they have a statistical power that they want or whatever. And they also tend to load the student up as well with things like courses and stuff like that. So you take a PhD student who's done a master's with that and included some courses, and then they've done a research project as well, a research thesis. Aren't they kind of done school? Like, they should be maybe done sitting in class.
Yeah.
But I've got colleagues who did their PhD in the U.S. and they're really smart coaches, but they had to take like plant biology just to get a 9th year elective or something.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
that. I don't remember the exact context, but I remember thinking, wow, like, I didn't take any courses during my PhD, and they were shocked.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean? Like, no, I did 12 research studies, 6 of them training studies.
Yeah.
And that's not uncommon in Australia.
Really?
That's not achievable in North America, because you're too busy taking 6 graduate level courses and, I don't know. I think that, and I might be alone in this thought pattern, but take it with a grain of salt, man. That's just my opinion. Is Australian universities, to me, are agile when it comes to applied sports science. They're really agile, and we aren't here.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head with that one, because that's the concern that a lot of strength and conditioning professionals have with the school system, right? Is we're sitting there taking classes and we're not really learning the practical knowledge, and then you get out into the field, right, and it's completely different. You basically abandon everything you learned in the classroom. So
for sure. Like an example, I had I don't even know the exact number, but I'm going to say about 12 students that I was a part of that did their PhD or master's in surfing, in the sports science of surfing.
Really?
And,
okay.
One of them, Lena Lundgren, got her PhD in the biomechanics of landing injuries from aerials. Ty Tran, a strength coach, got his PhD in adolescent strength conditioning as it relates to strength and power adaptations for surfers, training, detraining, all this kind of stuff. Josh Seckham, Oliver Farley did his in more of a physiology aspect. Joe's just finishing up. She's just submitted. So let's say 12 people. I think 2 were masters and 10. Joseph Coyne was another one. About 10 PhD, rough estimate. And a lot of them I shared supervision with people like Soph Nymphius and other colleagues, Greg Half, Rob Newton, a bunch of different people.
Yeah. Wow.
Good scientists, basically. I had to have other good scientists because I'm inadequate in that area. So as a supervisor, I need to complement my skill set with with theirs. And all up, like, each student probably spent 2 days on the university campus total.
Really?
2 days total.
Wow.
They spend more time on the beach, collecting data, coaching in the weight room, gymnastics, in the mind room, in the video analysis room. They weren't like students in the student lab or whatever. They had a job.
Yeah.
Like Lena's job was to be the biomechanist for Surfing Australia, and Josh's job was to be the World Qualifying Series strength conditioning coach for Surfing Australia. They had jobs, and what we did was we just weaved their topic into their job role.
Yeah.
And they just happened to 3 years later put a cover on the depth and breadth of their work and write an intro and a discussion. And it's not cheating. Like, it's really good work. Like, all these guys have published all their stuff.
Yeah.
It's good science. But we collected it in a way that impacted our daily training environment and allowed us to have stronger decision making in what we did.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Preparing surfers.
Yeah.
It's just a little harder to do here that way.
No, for sure. And that sounds like a fantastic approach. Will you explain a little bit what the mind room is?
Oh yeah, so we're not super innovators in this area, and we're making a slow roll and developing it here in Whistler. We're going to have a few things, but we would do stuff like biofeedback.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just things like going into, like, you recover from an intense training session. So one of our training sessions might be jet ski assisted wave riding, where we're eliminating the paddling that they do in order to create kind of like a small-sided games in football.
Oh, okay.
But what you're doing is you're removing the paddling so that they actually catch more waves per unit of time.
Gotcha.
So it's a physiological stress, but it's also a major psychological stress. Okay. So you can imagine what the heart rate is doing and what the heart rate variability is doing. They're in that engaged mode. Same with, you finish a hard workout of snatch or something like that, snatch and back squat. Getting them to jump into their car, especially a famous surfer who's probably got 50 missed calls in the 2.5 hours they've been training. Yeah. Bit stressful, right? It's not really recovery mode. Agreed. So we might, do some mindful breathing, guided meditation, whatever. They might watch a video that creates some kind of calming effect. We might do a saltwater float tank. So I was big into kind of the float tank stuff. Okay. We might do, all sorts of stuff like that. Gotcha. And then obviously an extra manifestation on that would be like bio and neural feedback as well. Okay. And as we try and get stronger and stronger and stronger in slope style and use flow states and flow state training, that's kind of where we go with mind room type concepts. Interesting.
No, that's really cool. Okay, so let's dive a little bit more into the training piece, right? So you talked about surfers and snowboarders. Will you talk about your approach to training surfers?
My philosophical approach to training almost anyone is, can be articulated pretty simple. Is I just call it masters and servants. Okay. So the master is the sport performance, and so to me that is the performance model. So by master I mean the performance model. So the anatomy of winning. Okay. The anatomy of accomplishing what you're supposed to do. So for a surfer, the master is surfing. Yeah. And in my case, it was competitive surfing. So competitive surfing excellence was the master. And so my philosophical approach is that everything that we do outside of competition and competition-like training is the servant, and it has to logically serve that master. Okay. And so you need inputs from the performance model. You need to know what the performance model is, because the servant, well, that's your preparation framework. Yeah. And that in a nutshell is my coaching philosophy, is learn the anatomy of the master, the performance model, and then that helps you serve. And then there's this continuous interplay between the servant and the master, so that, and I know we play around with this a lot with the athletes I work with. So as a surfer comes in, I might say to them, hey, why are you here? Yeah. And they're like, I'm here to get better at surfing. Okay. Sweet. Yeah. And then they might be like, what do we got on the agenda today? Well, we got this, and this. Okay. And the idea is that this, and this, whatever the components of today's training or this week's training or whatever, they all have a valid reason that we're doing it.
Yeah.
And we link that reason to the master, and it may not be direct.
Yeah.
Right? It might not be direct, but it might be indirect. So
Okay.
it might be like, okay, Darcy, why are you really working on this adductor hamstring resiliency work in addition to the main work that you're doing?
Yeah.
How is that directly related to snowboarding?
Uh-huh.
It's not directly related to snowboarding. It's directly related to him as an individual. He needs to get more resilient because of the way he snowboards.
Okay.
So that servant is serving that master. It might be 2 steps before you can link it right to winning more contests.
Mm-hmm.
But if he's to do the tricks the way he does them and not be as sore or not have as high injury risk,
Yeah.
that serves the master. It might be a 2-step process before you draw those dotted lines, but
Yeah.
you can still draw those dotted lines.
Interesting. Okay. So will you talk a little bit about then what the servant looks like as far as in terms of surfers
Sure.
in regards to like components of the program?
Sure. So one of the things that would be different, that's
Uh-huh.
probably a good place to start with compared to a lot of other sports, because there'd be a lot of similarities. You know, people are
Yeah.
like, okay, so you guys lift heavy things sometimes, and
Yeah.
you lift modest things very fast,
Yeah.
and you lift your body very explosively.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, that's very common.
Yeah.
Whether you're, like even an endurance athlete
Mhm.
does some of those things because it might help with like running economy or cross country skiing economy.
Mm-hmm.
But our why is slightly different, right? So
Okay.
we have these common things. What's probably different
Mm-hmm.
with surfers, and this isn't too different with snowboarders, but is different from a lot of other programs, is we do a lot more mobility work.
Okay.
And the way I sort of justify that is partly through cause and effect in terms of when we do mobility work, we are able to train at a higher volume in other areas.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, so let's take volleyball. If I go back to my volleyball days and I had quadrupled the mobility work for volleyball,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they could have tolerated more jumping.
Okay.
I think we kind of ended up figuring out that, say 120 to 160, depending on who you are, 120 to 160 hours a year for a volleyball player, they didn't tend to need more outside of that window, at least in my experience.
Okay.
There might be some case studies where there's more. But say a surfer might be doing 600 or 700.
Yeah.
And people are like, what? That's like, what are you talking about? Like, that means there's like stretching like an hour a day.
Yeah.
Well, if you count their soft tissue work, and then you count, say, some yoga routines that you're doing, warm-ups and warm-downs, you actually very quickly get to 600 or 700 hours a year with those kind of guys.
Yeah.
But in other sports, they might make 20, 30, 40 different significant shapes.
Okay.
But in surfing and snowboarding, they make hundreds of different significant shapes.
Yeah. That's interesting. Okay.
Sports basically making shapes and changing shapes.
Yeah.
And the freestyle sports that I work with, surfing and snowboarding, they make a lot of different shapes.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a serious investment in maintaining and improving mobility, and it tends to add to the total volume that we can do in other areas.
Gotcha.
So that's a big differentiating component.
Okay.
But we obviously base that based on individual response, orthopedic inputs, biomechanical inputs, those kind of things. The other thing to consider too is when someone has a chronic range of motion limitation, sometimes the limiting factor isn't just more yoga or foundation training or other great inputs, DNS, all different sort of mobility stuff that's effective, FRC, PRI, all this kind of stuff. The limiting factor might be just that muscle's weak, and the muscle's so weak that it doesn't want to be long. It wants to protect itself and it wants to be tight. So sometimes that tight hamstring is what you're showing me is a weak hamstring. So again, I would want the listeners to understand that it's all quite contextual, right? We don't just do yoga all day.
No, most definitely.
You need to be targeted and understand, training, you want to be able to put a quarter in and at least get a quarter out, but preferably you can put a quarter in, you can get $1 out. That's great.
Yeah.
And if an example with a hamstring, you show me a weak person with a weak hamstring that's also tight, do a hamstring stretch, I'm not even sure I'm getting the quarter back.
Yeah.
you get that hamstring stronger, and all of a sudden it's willing to be longer, and then you have some biomechanical corrections or some breathing corrections or whatever it is, big picture stuff that helps. Sometimes you put that quarter in, you put another quarter in, you put another quarter in, and you're like, oh, I got $30 back.
Yeah.
So it's the combination of those different inputs that really help you.
Okay. No, that's really interesting.
Yeah. Another one would be, we do a bit more acrobatics.
Yeah. Okay.
Makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah.
Now, the snowboarders I work with probably don't do as much acrobatics as some people might think. Some people might watch our guys on TV and be like, okay, there's 3 female snowboarders on the Canadian national team and 6 males, and they're doing all these tricks. Let's look at what their tricks are. So front triple, back triple, 14, 40, 16. Some of our guys are working on 1800s, all these different shapes that they make and spins that they do. So you might assume that we just live and breathe on trampolines, but their snowboarding level in many cases actually exceeds what either they're able to do or what is maybe even possible with gymnastics equipment. So we do gymnastics for a lot of fundamental movement, but we don't probably do as much trampoline as some people might think.
Yeah.
Some of our riders are amazing trampolinists, so they do it.
Okay.
But we got a few riders where they're average on the trampoline, and they're in the top 10 in the world in snowboarding. So for them, the trampoline's not even relevant.
Yeah.
It's like, why would I work on a double cork? Like, I did my first double cork when I was 11.
Yeah.
I'm 21 years old, and I'm working on a triple 1600. I can't replicate that on a trampoline. So it surprises some people to see that we're like tumbling and rolling and using vision training and occlusion glasses and all this kind of stuff, and that's our gymnastics bread and butter. It's not a ton of trampoline work, but for the girls, it's a great tool. But again, it doesn't mean like you can overdo it.
Okay.
Just like we could probably overdo airbag use as well. Like jumping into airbags can be overdone.
Yeah.
Useful tool, but like anything, it can be overdone.
Yeah. No, definitely. Okay. So you talked a little bit about the nuances in snowboarding, right? So what other differences in snowboarding might you see in their training or in their surfing, if you will?
Yeah, so surfers, in terms of a physical culture, I have a few theories why, but surfers are very quick to embrace, physical cultures that can upgrade their surfing, and they tend to be a bit quicker to see the cause and effect and things like that. And I think that's just where the evolution of that sport is. Despite snowboarding being in the Olympics for a while now, and surfing is going to debut at the Olympics at the next one, surfing is ahead in terms of that physical culture, except on the race side. Like, there's kind of a tale of two stories. Snowboard racers are athletes.
Okay.
Snowboard freestyle style athletes, they don't refer to themselves as athletes.
Really?
And that's evident as well in their emotional approach to training. So there's some differences there too. Very much it's organized play.
Yeah.
In snowboarding.
Okay.
Whereas for surfers, competitions have a slightly different feel to it. The world title race has a different reverence to it. So it's a slightly different place. Different place.
Gotcha.
But certainly some commonalities, and I wouldn't say for a second that it wasn't a huge advantage moving into snowboarding, having a surfing background.
Yeah.
That was that was a huge advantage. Huge advantage.
That's awesome. Yeah. Would you think it would have the same effect if you moved from snowboarding to surfing, or no, just because of that culture you were talking about?
I think so. I think it would. Like, if you were a strength conditioning coach that had worked with some top snowboarders, it would give you a lot of credibility working in, moving into the surfing world for sure. Okay.
So how does skateboarding stack up in this, right? So do you think it would be similar training to more closer to surfers or closer to snowboarders, or how do you think that kind of pans out?
Again, another shade, another slightly different shade. Like skateboarders, the bulk of skateboarders that will debut at the 2020 Olympics, from my understanding, will officially go there with a team manager. They wouldn't refer to that position as a coach.
Okay.
So that's where that sport is at.
Yeah.
Whereas surfers on the World Championship Tour, as well as surfers that are 10 years old, are happy to refer to their coach as a coach. Snowboarding, it's not uncool to have a coach, but it's not like seen as this mandatory thing, and skateboarding is another further distance. I think one of the things that you could say that's really common is that surfing, snowboarding, I mean, I'm not legit in skateboarding. Like I literally just cruise 50 yards from my house to the training center on my skateboard, and thankful that I don't fall over. But analyzing the movement, you're absorbing force and you're producing force.
Yeah.
So in surfing, you take off and you get to the bottom of the wave, you're absorbing some force or you're yielding some force, and then you're producing some force, and then you're absorbing some force and producing some force. So it's this continual, you might call it continuous stretch shortening cycle activity, but basically compression, extension, and creating flow. And snowboarding is no different. There's takeoffs, there's landings, there's producing force or resting force. Skateboarding has the same thing. So a lot of the running starts that I had moving from surfing to snowboarding has been around how we quantify force absorption, force production, and then how we target it outside of the water and off the snow in our case, and then link that to measuring it on the water and on snow.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so that's where I've had a real running start for sure.
Okay. So with that, right, so with the snowboarders and the surfers, right, how does the conditioning piece look for these athletes, right? Because obviously, surfing a big wave is a strenuous sport physiologically, so how does that look?
For sure. Great question. And it's funny, the first thing I'll probably mention is actually I love using skateboarding as our number one conditioning tool.
Really?
For snowboarding.
Okay.
Yeah. So let me just I just got my computer open here. But if I grab one of my riders' programs. So tomorrow he has a 10-minute just skate around warm up at the park. It's going to be a really sunny day. If it's not a sunny day, we'll go to an indoor facility.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a beautiful, sunny, hot day here in Whistler. He's going to go to the skate park earlier in the morning, one, so it doesn't get too hot, and two, before it gets crowded, so he can have the place to himself.
Yeah. And
he's just going to warm up for about 10 minutes, right?
Okay.
And then he's going to do a 15-second skate line. So he picks a line that takes about 15 seconds. So I just help him determine, I'm like, oh, that line's too long, it's 25 seconds. Yeah. Can you, maybe cut out that section of the skate park? So he picks a section of the skate park that he likes and flows, and then he repeats that. And he's going 15 seconds on, 45 seconds relief. Okay. Right? Yeah. But sometimes we'll have a lot more relief. And in this case, what we're doing is we're compressing that relief so that we can create, what you quote unquote in a textbook might call incomplete recovery. Okay. So we're just accumulating a little bit of work and not really letting them fully chill in between each rep. So after 8 reps of that, we're going to have accumulated some fatigue and hopefully be driving some adaptation. And then he takes a bit of a longer rest period, and then we have a few, like literally just a few, longer reps in the 30 to 45 second range to finish that off. So this sort of anaerobic/aerobic mix, it's a great way to do it because I'm taking someone who doesn't consider themselves an athlete. We're getting, the heart rate response and the blood lactate response that we, are generally hoping to see. Yeah. So we have a bit of a clue, I guess, that we're driving the right adaptation, or at least the intended adaptation. But also we're doing mental training because they're having to make they have to do decision making on demand, decision making under stress and duress. Yeah. As they go on, we're challenging their attention span, and they're essentially to execute this properly because they're good skaters, right? Yeah. So there's risk involved, there's gravity involved, and there's a skill challenge involved. So we've already put in place several elements of flow state. Okay. So we're practicing physiology, but we're also practicing mental performance skills, distraction control. We're also practicing dropping into flow state in a sense without actually chasing it. Because if you consciously chase flow, you literally guarantee that you won't get into flow state because you create a consciousness around something that needs to be the absence of consciousness. Yeah. So there's a lot of benefits there. In terms of surfing, my favorite conditioning piece, skating was great, especially for kids. Yeah. It was actually a great strength training stimulus for untrained girls, especially. Okay. And I don't mean girls separate from boys, but just for young girls who were like, they've never been in a weight room or whatever. a lot of times they were decent surfers, but they never skated before.
Okay.
So say compare, and the reason why I say girls instead of boys is the average 10-year-old male surfer in Australia definitely can skateboard. But we had numerous 10-year-old girls who were, talent ID, and they'd never skated before.
Yeah.
So they would get on the half pipe and just learn how to do a mini ramp back and forth, and all of a sudden all their force plate metrics were going great.
Interesting.
Wow, I always make the joke. I go, someday I'd love to present a few case studies at a major strength conference where I say, skateboarding, a strength training stimulus? Question mark.
Yeah.
Because we had people whose left to right leg muscle imbalance, reduced radically, and their isometric mid-thigh pull got better, and their single leg squat reps got better, and their vertical jump impulse and jump height obviously got better, and all we did was just be like, let's just get this girl on a skate ramp.
Wow.
So is it how much of that is due to maturation because she got older while we were doing it?
That's true.
Just 10 years old, right? But how much is it due to just learning how to balance their weight and produce an arrest forth in a rhythm, in a rhythmical manner? And rhythm is another thing that we probably, sort of like 20 years ago, most strength coaches were a capital S and a small C, and there was definitely no mobility, stability, flexibility, emphasis, right?
Yeah.
Strength coach with a capital S and conditioning with a small C.
Yeah.
I think our next thing that we will probably want to start consciously discussing as a profession is rhythm. And skateboarding creates a real lovely rhythm. Third thing I'd say, obviously general conditioning has its place. Give me a med ball, a skipping rope, and some battle ropes, and I can make people sweat too, for sure. And it's not irrelevant, it's not nonsensical, it's not junk miles or whatever. It's all relevant. But one thing I would say though is I don't loathe it really because that's strong language, but I don't use the term cross training very much.
Okay.
Because to me, cross training is just a good athlete doing someone else's sport.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Like one of my snowboarders, he's a pretty handy tennis player.
Okay.
He plays it, but when he plays tennis, I count that under his conditioning minutes.
Yeah.
For sure. But I'm not going to call it cross training. But if he skateboards, I count that under his conditioning minutes as well as his complementary training minutes.
Gotcha. Okay.
So if he surfs and skates, I'll call that complementary training.
Interesting.
But if he just plays tennis, I'm like, it's cross training, so it's just conditioning minutes. Right?
Yeah. No, I get that. I'm with that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And then another great conditioning piece that we can do is look at the context that we want to create. So, anyone who's skied or snowboards knows that, most of the time you take a chairlift or you take a gondola or you take a T-bar and then you ride down. And so you remove a lot of the earn your turn, as we say in snowboarding, earn your turns, right? So hiking and things like that. But professional snowboarders, it's pretty simple, like to add some conditioning in. You might say, okay, this week the snow forecast looks really good. Based on your average, you're probably going to snowboard for about 12 to 18 hours this week. 2 times, 45 minutes this week. I'd love for you to hike a rail. And what that means is there's a feature in the snowboard park. It's a rail. And what they do is they just hit that rail, and then they, instead of riding another 400 meters down and grabbing the chairlift and being 20 minutes before they hit that rail again, they just unstrap their snowboard and they walk back up the hill. And they just repeatedly hit that rail. They catch their breath at the top, and then they go. And hiking in your snowboard gear, you're hiking uphill, the boots are designed for snowboarding. They're not like an ice pick, right? So it's a bit, it's a bit harder than it should be, right?
Yeah.
Than regular snow boots. And so, we get a really nice conditioning effect just by throwing in some hiking in the rails.
Interesting.
With surfers, we might be like, okay, we might be doing some paddle-specific conditioning. So we might look at their maximum aerobic speed from a time trial, a 400-meter paddling time trial, calculate 100% or their maximum aerobic speed for that time trial, and then do intervals at 110 and 120% of that time trial, or we might do repeat sprint efforts.
Yeah.
Aiming to make sure that they're within 90 to 95%. If we're looking for long relief, or we may create density patterns where they have to repeat the sprint effort and the quality deteriorates a bit, but they're having to repeat it and create like a repeated sprint bout. They might do 4 repeated sprints. with far from complete rest in between.
Yeah.
And we're looking at how they manage that. And then, as I mentioned, the jet ski was one of our favorites because our pro surfers, they might average 12 or might range from 12 to 20 hours a week of surfing, right?
Yeah.
About 50% of the time you're surfing, you're paddling.
Okay.
So choosing extra paddle conditioning, you need to be careful. You need to understand that big picture. Is more paddling really what's needed? Or could I condition them in other ways? And that might be more general stuff. Grab the skip rope and the ropes and the med ball and the strong man or whatever it is you want to do. Or it could be, all right, we're going to give you a jet ski and we're going to actually, instead of you doing 300 meters of paddling in a 10-minute time period in order to catch 3 waves, you're going to catch 12 waves in that same 10-minute time period. And we got some incredible physiological responses to that, and a lot of stoke from the riders. They were pretty excited about that, little conditioning game that we used to play.
Yeah. No, that's really cool, and I think it's really cool how you just break down each sport, right, and then apply the conditioning that's most relevant, because most people, including myself, like you say, are capital or strength coaches with a capital S, lowercase c. So in terms of like thinking about snowboarders or surfers, you say write a conditioning program, and a lot of people would freeze up, So that I think is really cool to hear.
Yeah, and I think too, I guess the benefit. I appreciate that, you saying that. Thank you. I would say, too, though, that I've had the good fortune that I said it was a competitive advantage and a strong start for me to work with such a variety of sports. But now I'm so fortunate in that I get to focus on only a few sports.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like I had the good beginning, and now I have the time, right? Like I got the time to reflect. So maybe that's why other people might freeze up, is because they don't wake up in the morning thinking about the one sport that they have as a professional responsibility. They might wake up and they've got 4, but last year it was a different 4.
That's true.
Right?
Okay.
Because like last year they worked at a Division II school and they were head of strength conditioning, and this year they work at a Division I school and they're assistant, and so they have men's and women's basketball, men's and women's volleyball, women's water polo, men's water polo, and sprints and hurdles. Right? It's like, okay, how do you savagely understand the sport anatomy when the NCAA dictates that you get those people for certain periods of time? How do you get them out of their normal context? Like I'm running a session at a skate park tomorrow. Like how many coaches listening to this would say that they run even more than 10% of their training sessions outside of the main field and the main weight room?
Yeah. That's a good point.
Whereas I'm like, we're doing stuff on park benches in Switzerland, right? Like, because you just, I'm traveling with the team, and I'm intimately involved in what they're doing, and I'm not considered the strength conditioning coach. I don't even have that title. It's the off-snow coach. Yeah. So we have on-snow coaches and we have off-snow coaches. So it's very much the seamless thing, right? I live in that world. So I have an advantage, but I do appreciate the compliment. I do pride myself on understanding that sport anatomy, but I'm also in a real advantageous position.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. And then going back to an earlier point, right, when you were talking about training snowboarders, you said, for example, you would have them skate a line for 15 seconds. So in that, are they constantly pushing off in that, or how much time is there coasting, or what does that look like?
Well, they're coasting and creating flow, but that's I don't mean to confuse the two terms. When I talk about flow earlier, I was talking about flow state. Okay. Which is a metaphysiological state. Yeah. It's a psychological phenomenon, really. On their skateboard, they push to get going, but then because they're in a skate park, or sometimes on a mini ramp, they're using the transition. The change in the terrain, basically, to create speed. And that's what you do on a snowboard as well. Yeah. That's what you do on a surfboard as well. Okay. The transition of the wave, or the vert of the wave, is where the speed is. People might say the pocket, or the power source of the wave. Well, in a skate park, as Mikey rolls over the top of a coping and then drops in, it's this force absorption and force propulsion. Okay. This dynamic. And so that's where the leg is doing work. Yeah. And that's where the work is done. It's a whole body thing, but obviously primarily through the legs. Gotcha. It's not like they finish and go, oh, my thinner muscle is sore from the work, right? Like my thumb is sore. It's like no, it's like my quads are burning.
Yeah,
so they're creating a lot of work through the legs.
Okay, that makes sense. So with this, right? Well, first off, do you use technology, and if so, how do you utilize that within training sessions?
Yeah, I use tech a little bit, and I think with any new tech that comes out, sometimes we sort of freak out, like why haven't we been using this for a while?
Yeah.
And we tend to overuse it.
Yeah.
So like our pendulum swings, too far one way, and then it swings back the other way sometimes. And we stop using it altogether. We're like, no, that's horrible. You should never use that. Like, like go around and I don't know, back in the late '90s, people going around like popping Swiss balls with knives. Swiss balls are useless, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's actually a pendulum reaction to we were probably overusing them in the mid '90s. Mm-hmm. Saying insane things like it's not functional strength unless you can stabilize while doing it. Therefore, you should do your bench press with dumbbells on a Swiss ball. Like, guilty as charged. 1996 got a lot weaker though.
Yeah, definitely.
And I was like, it's not serving the master, is it? I'm trying to get stronger, right?
Yeah.
But so you find the pendulum, right? And then you end up finding this balance where you use it, but you don't overuse it and you don't underuse it. Yeah. So I use a few different things. I mean, we're lucky. We have force plates that are embedded, dual force plates, and that's quite contextual for us, like having a left and right force plate data that we use as a monitoring tool. So we monitor that as a response to training. So it's kind of like an objective way to monitor their current status as an athlete. Because as we say in snowboarding, the term is called pop, which is basically impulse, right?
Yeah.
So if you jump, you hit a jump and then you use your legs and your whole body and create a really efficient vertical jump, that's not referred to as a vertical jump in snowboarding. That's referred to as pop. And so we say pop. So we're just measuring pop on a force plate, and I guess that's a use of technology. We also use it in our comprehensive testing analysis, force absorption capabilities, force production capabilities, stabilization, like time to stabilization after dropping and sticking, so landing tasks, those kind of things. So I'm pretty au fait, used to using force plates. I've been using them for a while. I'm pretty lucky with that.
Okay.
I prefer using linear position transducers if I want to incorporate some evidence or have it influence potential decisions or even just for monitoring with velocity-based training, what you might call velocity-based training, where I want to just see how fast are they moving that load.
Gotcha.
So I might talk to my two people I'm fortunate to be friends and colleagues with, Brian Mann and Dan Baker. They have thought more deeply about this topic than I probably need to. But the good fortune for me is I can talk to them, and sometimes I come to them with a case study and go, I got this oddball. We all have the oddball, right? So that's how great conversations start at conferences, right? We're like, hey Brian, I want to talk to you about this oddball.
Yeah.
And so we might use that on mostly these days I just use it for front squat and back squat. I don't use it for too much else. And then other monitoring tools, lots of different monitoring tools, assessment tools, whether it's doing lactates, heart rate monitors, biofeedback for heart rate variability. Neurobiofeedback is not something that I'm an expert in, but certainly an advocate of. So within the IST, my mental performance coach, Christy, and my skill acquisition coach, Chris Bertram, that's their area. They're the experts, but I'm the advocate. Same with our other areas. And, whether it's this morning during some routine medicals, we order some blood tests, whether you call that as technology, I don't really know. But yeah, a lot of different things. Also, sleep is really important for us.
Yeah.
So rather than using sleep logs, we actually monitor that, and we do that with fatigue science. I feel it's acceptable for me to drop the name of that company because it's not a paid partnership nor even a sponsorship. I looked at what was out there, and I just kind of look at it like these guys are the Formula One. So for us, we travel the endless winter. We're going around the world all the time. We got to supplement vitamin D. We got all these other challenges by living in the endless winter. And sleep's something that we I don't want to sort of do it well.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, if we can be the best sleepers in the world, I actually think that's a competitive advantage for us because we can learn tricks faster.
Yeah, I
if
agree.
we have good sleep. This is a known.
Mm-hmm.
This is not just I reckon.
Yeah.
This is a known, and obviously, you know, the macro recovery benefits of sleep and all the micro recovery stuff. It's super important. You know, like we use Normatec. Yeah, we use Muscle Stim. Like there's another tech I use that I totally forget. I just got to think about my week. What have I used this week? You know, Muscle Stim, Normatec, Contrast Fast, you know, cryo chambers, float tanks, sensory deprivation goggles, visual occlusion goggles. Like I used to use Nike, and now Nike doesn't do it anymore, so I'm using Synaptech from my friend Peter out of California, who's an ex-Navy SEALs now, championing this cause. We do, visual occlusion stuff with Synaptech. Those are all different techs, but all the going back to the recovery stuff, all those micro recovery things, I'm not at all challenging their efficacy. Yeah. But I would say that mental state, nutrition, and sleep, to me, those are my big three for macro recovery. Okay. And so the one we can monitor really well through our fatigue science band is sleep, and you emphasize what you measure. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So if you work with tennis and you emphasize the vertical jump, and the players ask, why are we doing this? You say, because it's a reflection of your explosive leg strength, which we know is important for tennis. Yeah, right? Most definitely. You've just emphasized it because you're measuring it every Monday at tennis practice. Yeah. Right? Great. If we give someone a sleep band, and every coach and our physiotherapist, everyone's wearing the sleep band, we create a culture without even overtly stating it, that sleep is super important, and we will major in this so-called minor area. I would argue it's not minor at all. Yeah. I'd argue that it's super important. So, and everyone in our entire squad, from our chief medical officer to our head on snow coach, is absolutely on board with that. Interesting. Okay. Awesome. And so moving forward, right, so on your social media, it seems one of your hobbies are archery. Have you been able to train any archers, and how might that kind of look? I definitely haven't trained any archers. The closest I'd ever come was when I was at AIS. They had an archery field, and they had a small archery program, and I wandered over there once. Okay. That's it. AIS is a big campus, right? Yeah, When I was there was a ton of sports there and a ton of athletes. So I saw them in the gym, and a couple colleagues at various times worked with them, and their approach was kind of, if you don't have to make them great athletes compared to other sports, but if you can give them, some basic, fundamental mobility, stability, and then some strength, you can potentially have an impact upon performance. It might be that 4 or 5 hemispheres away from the actual performance, but there seemed to be some relevance there and all that. Okay. I should point out though that if someone listening is actually an archer, I need to clarify, I'm not an archer. I'm a bow hunter. Okay. So, and as a bow hunter, I'm not a very good archer. So, like, people who are archers, like, I got a ton of respect for them, but I'm not one of them. I'm not in that world. Okay. They do things like shoot from, I don't even know, but I'm going to throw a random, they might shoot like from 80 yards or 100 yards or 60 yards, and they might use traditional equipment. They might actually have a really low poundage on their bow, so it's like 20 yards. Yeah. So what that means, 20 pounds. So what that means is like they're shooting like a long bow or a recurve, more traditional equipment. It's a modern version of traditional equipment, and they've got to like use a pin sight, and like the arrow has to fly upwards, and then like a parabola. They got to get the parabola right. Like they're experts at shooting stuff, and like they're good. I shoot from short distances because like what I need to spend my time more on is like repetition at 10 yards, 15 yards, 20 yards, 30 yards, 40 yards, 50 yards. But I use a compound bow that will take down a big game animal. Yeah. Okay. Right. And so I don't have to do these crazy shots where it's like this big parabola, because it's like boom, like the like the arrow's moving hard, fast, and it has a lot of destructive power on impact. So I'm literally shooting, most commonly 20 to 40 yards, and I wouldn't even try to harvest an animal at 40 yards.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's an ethical shot. If I make a mistake, I have an animal that I will never find.
Yeah.
That will spend the next 4 days of its miserable life suffering. And I love animals. I respect the forest.
Yeah.
I respect Gaia. I respect Gaia. I respect the earth.
Yeah.
And that just doesn't fit into the ethics.
Yeah.
Even though I'm okay from 40 yards. I shoot from 40 so that 30 feels good and to create random practice.
Yeah.
So that my skill acquisition is better. But I'm more likely to crawl on the ground for 30 yards with my bow balancing on my back.
Yeah.
Then quietly knock my arrow, draw back as quiet as I can, and shoot from one knee.
Yeah. Okay.
That's more likely how I would train, rather than be like, I need to get good from 100 yards.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I shouldn't. I probably should, but I have too many hobbies to become a great archer. I just want to be a really good bow hunter.
Fair enough.
And to me, the hardest part is to not have the animal smell you. So you got to know the wind, you got to know the forest.
Oh man.
You gotta be able to be quiet.
Yeah.
Which I'm getting better at, but like it's hard to sneak up on an animal that is like literally they have evolved to avoid things killing them, like ungulates, like deer and elk and stuff like that. Like they're it's not easy to sneak up on them.
Interesting.
Right?
Okay.
I actually practice that more than I probably practice my archery.
Yeah. Fair enough. Valuable skills though, So in this last segment here, I'm just gonna kind of pitch you some rapid fire questions, right? And then you just kind of give me the first thing that comes to mind. So the first one, what is the best advice that you've ever been given?
Been given a lot of good advice. I'm gonna go with Tim McGraw.
Okay.
Don't take for granted the love this life gives you. When you get where you're going, don't forget to turn back around. Help the next person in line. Always stay humble and kind. We play that song for my son a fair bit. My wife doesn't like country music.
Yeah.
I like country music when I'm going hunting. So I like hip hop. I like punk, and I listen to country sometimes. So that's a Tim McGraw song.
Fair enough. Okay, I like it. What's the worst advice you've ever been given?
That's an easy answer. There is nothing you can do about it, Jeremy. This is the way we've always done it.
Okay. A lot of us hear that one.
Worst advice ever, and try that on for size.
Yeah.
My mission in life is to challenge the established rules and awaken creativity.
I love it. Awesome. Okay. What is something that you will carry with you always, whether it's a quote, an idea, a mentality, or like an experience?
I love quotes. I find them powerful, but for me, the easiest answer for that is discovering the power of reflection and how it can generate a life where you just have more gratitude.
Yeah.
And then that in and of itself is extremely powerful.
Yeah.
There's a lot of books on happiness out there. If you stop on your way through the airport, you'll see a million books on how to be happy.
Yeah.
Man, for me, the most powerful thing is to take time to reflect.
Yeah.
And then when you reflect, you realize what you're really grateful for. And if you reflect because you, like my wife goes for her trail run and sits by a waterfall a lot and meditates, and that's how she gets her reflection, and that can obviously create a life of gratitude. But however you do that, it doesn't have to be her way or my way, but however you do that, I think is extremely powerful and something I value.
No, I definitely agree, and I don't think enough people reflect on stuff, right? Because we're always focusing on the next thing, and so there's not enough reflection. So that's really good.
Can't get to the growth mindset without reflecting, because you can't practice humility without reflecting. Yeah. And you don't get to growth you don't get growth mindset without humility. And it's hard to get to humility if you think everything you're doing is great. Yeah. You got to stop and reflect first and go, wow. Yeah. Okay. I don't appreciate this person enough. I undervalue this. I made a mistake here. I want to get better.
No, I like that. Awesome. And then the last question. So what are you working on now, and how can people kind of follow you and reach out to you?
I'm always working on my 5 pillars.
Okay.
For me, those 5 pillars are, being a father and husband. My coaching and my career is another pillar. Being an athlete, despite being my age, it's still helpful to refer to yourself as an athlete, even as we age, whether it's bow hunting or hiking in order to bow hunt, or doing loaded step-ups so that I can carry an animal out, or making sure that as I age, my surfing pop-up is good, so I work on my stretching and my upper body explosive strength. Whatever it is, that's helpful. That's my third pillar, I guess. Being a friend, that's a pillar, like being a good friend. And then just, general spirit, that humanity part of it, which I refer to it as humanity, because when you say spirit, sometimes people think, a religious context, and it's not necessarily a religious context at all times,
Okay. Fair enough. And then how can people reach out to you?
I don't know. I reluctantly got onto social media first via Twitter when my friend Duncan French convinced me it was a good way to connect with people and also save time in gathering information, but also sharing information. So I do a bit of that, and to be honest, Duncan was correct. That was, I was skeptical, but he was correct. It's been a helpful thing. And I guess part of why it's been helpful because I don't overvalue it, right? Like if someone says something I don't like, I don't, freak out and start, become a, thumb typing bandit or whatever, like I just kind of just go, haha, move on. It's not real because it's in a phone, right? And then, Instagram. So my handle for both those mediums is Sheppard Coach.
Okay.
That's kind of, I share a few things, some personal, some professional. I don't divide them because in my roles, like I don't need to monetize anything, right? Like I don't need to sell anything or anything like that. So I don't take the advice that you'll get if you read a book on how to manage your social media professionally. It'll tell you to keep personal and professional separate. But that's good advice for people who want to monetize it, right? Whereas for me, it's not a marketing tool.
Well, that makes sense. Awesome.
So I'm on both those.
Okay. Well, Coach, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. I've learned a ton from it. This is one of those areas that like a lot of people don't really know anything about or know that they can even get into. So I greatly value your time. Thank you so much, and I hopefully look forward to connecting with you again in the future.
Yeah, I appreciate you shining a light on some of the stuff that we're doing. It's very humbling, and I've got a bunch of the podcasts loaded up. Listened to a few while I've been hiking, and I just think this is a great thing for our profession to have these type of mediums for us to share and for people to communicate in this way. So thanks for all the work. I can only imagine that it's not an easy thing. Yeah, most definitely. I mean, it's definitely worth it though. Like you said, for myself and for the rest of the profession. So once again, thank you, and I, have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon. Right on. Thanks, man. All right. Take care. Thanks again for joining us. And if you enjoyed the podcast, please like, comment, share on your social media platform of choice. And if you have any questions, comments, or ideas, please feel free to shoot me an email. I'd love to hear from you. Next week, I'll have another exciting guest. But until then, this is the Game Mute of Performance podcast.